I would be the first to admit that the heat during the last growing season really discouraged me. Nothing seemed to work in the hot weather, and it required me to take a step back to reorganize my garden. I realized that I had to accept that extreme heat was probably the new normal. So I needed to select plants that could not only tolerate the heat, but also produce enough for me to store over the winter months. This is what I learned along the way. Before I could even think about plants, I needed to focus on getting water into the soil. Florida has been going through a statewide drought over the last 2 months, so my rainwater system has really come in handy. I've been pleased with the combination of clay pot oyas and underground soil saturating containers. I didn't stand a chance growing last year because water was evaporating almost as fast as I sprayed it above ground. This new system causes all of that water to go below ground to the roots where plants need it the most during hot days. So now, the first heat-tolerant plant I decided to work on was my banana plant. I wanted a banana plant for the longest time, but this is the second year that a freeze has killed them off, and I haven't gotten any bananas. I always knew they were heavy nitrogen feeders, but I didn't appreciate just how much they needed to be fed in addition to watering. So I cut back the dead stalks to let new pups form. After a few days, I came back to add nitrogen fertilizer, a little extra compost, and leaves for organic matter. I even used the dead banana leaves I cut off earlier as organic matter. I plan to have a regimen of watering every other day and feeding them every 3 weeks. I also plan to cut the lower leaves that form, which should encourage growth and production. The plant was trying to do its job, getting big each year, but I wasn't doing my part to help it grow and produce bananas. So this year, I'm expecting production from a plant given every opportunity to grow. The heat-tolerant and pest-resistant boxcar willy tomatoes have sprouted and developed enough true leaves for me to move them to their own individual double cup containers. In the individual double cups, I can begin to add nutrients to help speed growth. So by the time I'm ready to put them in the beds, they will be ready for heavy production. The heat-tolerant cherry tomatoes are taking their own time, but that's okay because it gives me time to work on other things before I move them to individual cups. Another heat-tolerant plant I'm expecting more from is the sweet potato. I got a decent harvest and lots of vines last year. But what I discovered is, unlike the bananas that need a little babying, the sweet potato simply wants to be left alone. They go against everything we expect to do in that they don't want rich soil, extra watering, or extra nitrogen. Especially the nitrogen. That causes them to focus on producing vines above ground. Because life is good. Holding back on nutrients causes it to go into survival mode and produce more fruit underground. On the other hand, the one nutrient it does want, at least initially, is phosphorus for root or tuber development. This is where my homemade bone meal comes in. I added it to the soil and will come back and add my slips and direct sow a few sweet potatoes from last year. This season I'm doing 2 beds, so I put up a second vine trellis for the extra bed. Less nitrogen will give me the vines I want, but more tubers I can store for over the winter. This next heat-tolerant plant is new for me, but I think will work quite well. It is yard-long beans. They're known to produce a big crop of very long beans that can be used in stir-fries, canned or frozen. Some people even pickle them. So far, I've been pleased because they're fast growers. I've put up strings so they will have room to climb while allowing me easy access to the yard-long beans. Another heat-tolerant plant I really like is Dinosaur Kale. They love the sun, but benefit from a few hours of shade. So I've planted heat-tolerant pole beans with a trellis to provide a little partial shade for the kale. The pole beans will set a few vines while I wait on the dinosaur kale to develop true leaves to be planted outside. A fun fact, peas like to climb sideways and beans like to climb up. So I had to come back and add vertical string to my trellis to allow the beans to climb. I'm really looking forward to growing the Florida native Seminole pumpkins because growing pumpkins in Florida is challenging. These pumpkins are rapid growers and put out tons of vines that I plan to train onto a trellis over the long beds to create a pumpkin tunnel. The only downside to them is that they take a while to germinate. I've put in sticks so I know where they're planted to help with trellising once they sprout. I'm also doing loofah that loves the heat and will use them as a substitute for squash because when they're small, they're very tasty and also work well in stir-fries. Every year, I let 1 or 2 grow big for seeds and brush pads. But I'll tell you, once you have loofah, you will always have loofah because one pod produces about 30 seeds. And on to the tried and true okra plants that love the Florida heat and humidity. They're putting out true leaves, and I'll move them to individual double cups in a couple of days before putting them in the bed. Okra's not for everyone, but I love them for gumbos filled with tomatoes, corn, and shrimp. And the last heat-tolerant plant I'm really looking forward to growing is Roselle. They too are a plant that likes to be left alone, but simply require periodic fertilizing and water. If grown right, the plant can become bushy, so I've cleared off a spot just for them away from the main beds where they can get lots of sun. These beautiful flower-producing plants are light sensitive, so most of the growing season they just grow. But once sunlight begins to shorten, they put out beautiful flowers that produce calyxes that make great jam. The round seed pod also produces its own pectin to harden your jam, so it's pretty helpful in storing them for the winter. You can also dry the calyxes to use for tea or different drinks. My seeds have not arrived just yet, but I have plenty of time to get them in the ground. So there you have my list of heat-tolerant plants that will not only stand up to the extreme Florida heat, but also provide tons of food for me to store over the winter. I'll provide updates as I go along, but for now, see you next time.